like many hundreds of thousands of people across the world, apart from the USA, have been following the sad case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. And there has been much footage, as we all know, regarding their trip across parts of America, living what they call the van life. I don't wish to go into too much detail about that, because on social media and YouTube there is an enormous amount now of police body cam footage and all sorts, where we see snippets of this young couple and what may or may not have been happening within their life. But what we do know is that Gabby Petito disappeared, according to the autopsy report. She disappeared on August 27, 2021, at the age of 22. And the cause of death is stated as homicide by strangulation. The remains of Gabby were found on September the 19th, 2021. A massive tragedy for a young girl of that age, just beginning to carve away into life with so much potential. And as many know, obviously, she was travelling with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. And obviously, across social media, there has been enormous interest because Brian Laundrie didn't exactly go missing, but possibly, allegedly, did, as we say here in the UK often, did a runner. He went, he legged it, he disappeared, with no thought or care of the young woman that was left behind, out in the elements, deceased, a woman he was supposed to have loved. Again, there's a lot of information on YouTube, both good and bad, about what happened. But nevertheless, it has gripped hundreds of and thousands of us, wondering where this person is, or was, where he had disappeared to. Was he travelling in the Appalachian Way? Had he escaped to Mexico? Was he living on a little island off Florida? Had he even been abducted by aliens, according to the tinfoil hat wearers? I don't wish to be light on it, but it did become rather a circus, sadly. And regardless of what one thinks about this Brian Laundrie and what has happened, and perhaps how his parents may or may not have behaved, his remains have now been found close to his parents' Florida home. So for weeks, the world has watched and waited and wondered, where was Brian Laundrie? Was he still alive? Was he running? Was he hidden? But on Wednesday, the 20th of October, Brian Laundrie human remains were found at a Florida reserve. And as I say, this discovery came after a weeks-long manhunt at the Carlton Reserve following the disappearance and death of his 22-year-old fiancée, poor Gabby Petito. Unfortunately, the nature of the find of the remains has had to be established by dental records. And one or two people are saying that it isn't him, it's a cover-up. And there are many theories. Whether that's because it's been so many weeks of pent-up hype, manhunt, etc., whatever you want to call it. It's almost like the adrenaline is still running. But we have to stop now. And as Gabby and her family would say, let it be. And some people are wondering, how on earth could they possibly know it was Brian Laundrie that's been found by his dental records? And how, in fact, even if there's only partial dental records, putting it carefully, they would ever know it was him. So I think the DNA of discovering someone found deceased by using dental records is incredibly interesting and needs perhaps talking about. So that's what I'm going to do. You'll see that my photo is the symbol for DNA. And DNA, as many know, I know, is the chemical name for the molecule that carries genetic instructions in all living things. The DNA molecule consists of two strands that wind around one another to form a shape known as a double helix. DNA in the teeth can be obtained from odontoplastic processes of dentin, cellular cementum, neurovascular tissues of pulp, radicular canals, periodontal ligament, and alveolar bone. DNA is present in adequate quantity in the crown, body, root body, and root tip of the teeth. According to the Mohs hardness scale, tooth enamel earns a 5 point. That means it's about as hard or even harder than steel. For reference, diamonds are the strongest substance on Earth, ranking a 10 on the Mohs scale. Teeth and the Black Death, as an example, here in the UK and all over Europe. Teeth have been used to answer historical questions as well as identify victims, and for years, scientists and historians have sought to discover if the bubonic plague outbreaks during the Middle Ages were actually caused by the Yersinia pestis bacteria. Pulp was extracted from the teeth of people who had allegedly died of the plague, and the DNA tested for the presence of Y. pestis. Although it was found in some of the teeth, not all of the alleged plague victims' teeth contained the bacteria. So therefore, some of these people have died of other diseases and not bubonic plague after all. This is just an example I'm putting out there because the bubonic plague was 700 years ago or less, and shows just how well they can find in teeth that old. What's going on? What happened to that person that is deceased? Teeth and bones are frequently the only sources of DNA available for identification of degraded or fragmented human remains. The unique composition of teeth and their location in the jawbone provide additional protection to DNA compared to bones, making them a preferred source of DNA in many cases. Despite this, post-mortem changes in the structure and composition of teeth and the location and diagenesis of DNA within them are poorly understood. The total DNA content of teeth varies considerably between individuals and also between teeth from the same individual. Some people wonder whether a chipped tooth or the enamel being chipped would affect being able to find DNA. Tooth enamel is an acellular structure, thus you cannot obtain DNA from enamel. The enamel does not contain much DNA because the ameloblasts, which are the cells that produce and transport the enamel proteins and form the mineral deposits, self-destruct after they do their job. They undergo programmed cell death, which essentially destroys the DNA. But dentine contains more DNA, and in addition, the pulp within the tooth contains cells and vessels that are protected by the dentine, cement and enamel, and these are the best sources of DNA in a tooth to identify human remains or even to do ancient DNA studies. With ancient specimens, where no pulp is left, the dentine part is drilled into a fine powder and the DNA is extracted from there. So, my point, I guess, is that whilst sadly there may not be much left of Brian Laundrie, he has been identified by his teeth, or a tooth, or part of a tooth, and that it is possible to extract DNA using the techniques I've described. Personally, I think people underestimate what the scientists do, the anthropologists do, and this person is now deceased, in my opinion, and looking at the facts and the research can be found, and looking at the facts and research on tooth DNA extraction. It is time to put this to rest. There are no conspiracy theories. Let it be, as I've said, and as Gabby and her family want it to be. Let it be. I think it will take time for law enforcement and science to bring together as much facts as they can. But one thing we do know is there's been a long, horrible road these last few months, and a sad, sad end to a beautiful young woman And that's all I have to say on it. Take care. Try not to rage at the machine, as I say. Have a good weekend. Carrie Pink.